47 million Americans watched as Jasmine Crockett locked eyes with Kash Patel beneath the blinding red lights of Congress, the man accused of burying Epstein's secret files. One sentence from her shattered the silence, and the chamber froze. Power cracked, truth bled through the marble walls. Will America dare to face what she just unleashed? 47 million Americans held their breath. The hearing room doors sealed shut, and before the cameras, one woman stood, alone, surrounded by a sea of powerful men. The red live light bled across the marble walls like a fresh wound, turning every polished surface into a battlefield. Camera shutters clicked in nervous rhythm, wires hummed under the floor. The air was thick, electric, like a storm waiting for permission to break. Kash Patel sat in the center chair, his face carved into stone, one hand resting on a classified folder. But Jasmine Crockett stepped forward, each stride sharp, deliberate, her heels striking the floor like drum beats of defiance. Her eyes, unwavering, cut through the rows of suits and silence like a blade finding its mark. The broadcast timer ticked upward, and the glint of light caught Patel's cufflink, a nervous flicker, a flash of unease. Behind him, a woman clutched her handbag, whispering a prayer. The press gallery held their breath as if even oxygen would betray the moment. Thomas Massey lifted a thick stack of files, their cover stamped FD 302 in fading black ink. Words like trafficking, billionaire, royal echoed off the chamber walls, falling like shards of glass that someone had tried to sweep away years ago. Patel's jaw tensed. His fingers tapped a slow, mechanical rhythm until the word minors landed and the rhythm faltered. A fracture in the mask. Jasmine raised her hand. Her voice sliced through the tension. Not loud, not hurried, but with the weight of a gavel striking truth. Before we read the names, and she said, we read the crimes. No one moved. No one even breathed. The room felt suddenly weightless, suspended in silence. The chairman's gavel struck the desk, sharp but hollow. A camera panned to Jasmine's face, her lips still, her eyes blazing. Patel reclined, forcing calm into his voice. There is no credible evidence, he began, but the words collapsed midair, swallowed by the silence Jasmine had built around him. Massey hesitated, his eyes flicking toward her like a man who just realized the fuse was already lit. A staffer behind Patel slid him a folded note, its edge stamped with a red seal. Jasmine saw it before it touched the desk. The camera zoomed in on her eyes, fire reflected in black glass. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She stood as a mirror of power itself, unflinching, relentless, dangerous to every lie that had ever learned to breathe. Someone coughed, short and dry, and the sound died instantly. In the control room, producers whispered frantic commands. Cut the feed if she says CIA. Cut it now. Jasmine turned toward Patel. Her tone was calm, almost soft, yet it carved through the marble. You can redact the names. You cannot redact the truth. It wasn't in the official record, but it didn't have to be. The words were carved into the air, heavy and permanent. In bars across the country, hands froze on beer glasses. In hospital break rooms, nurses stopped mid-step. The red light flickered above the C-SPAN feed, and every viewer watching knew they weren't seeing politics anymore. They were witnessing a reckoning. Patel drew in a long breath, trying to steer the narrative back to the safety of procedure. But Jasmine blocked the path, not with volume, but with presence. And as Massey turned the next page, the ink no longer looked like ink. It looked like fingerprints of the people whose stories had been buried beneath signatures and silence. The live light didn't change color, but the air in the room did. It felt as though someone had just unsealed a vault that was never meant to be open, and in that moment, nobody needed another name to know. This was no longer about what was in the files. It was about who had the courage to read them aloud before the world. Patel leaned forward, the microphone catching the edge of his controlled breath. His tone was surgical, rehearsed, unshakable. There is no credible evidence, he said, each word falling like a gavel meant to close the case before it even began. The marble chamber swallowed the sound, but something in his voice cracked. Not loud enough for the microphones, just enough for Jasmine to hear. Jasmine tilted her head, a half-smile ghosting her lips. Not amusement, but disbelief sharpened into elegance. "You said we," she replied, the word dripping with irony. "Tell me, Director Patel, who exactly is we? Justice? Or the men you're protecting behind it?" Her voice didn't rise, but the air itself seemed to recoil. The sentence traveled like a bullet that found its mark without ever making a sound. Every eye in the room froze. The red live light pulsed once, twice, as if even the machinery felt the weight of what had just been said. A low hum from the press section died mid-breath. Somewhere in the back, a phone slipped from a trembling hand and hit the floor, the thud echoing through silence that no one dared to break. In living rooms across America, time stalled. In a smoky bar in Ohio, an old white woman pressed her hand to her chest. "She's saying what we've all been afraid to say," she whispered, her voice cracking. In a dim hospital lounge, a nurse paused between shifts, her eyes wide, whispering to no one. "That's what truth sounds like." Patel's mask of calm slipped for a fraction of a second. The tiny twitch of an eyelid, the tightening of his throat. Cameras caught it, magnified it, broadcasted it in slow motion across millions of screens. Jasmine saw it too, and for the first time, she didn't have to speak. The truth was visible, not in her words but in his reaction. And then she did speak, her tone low, deliberate, steady as thunder beneath velvet. "When power becomes a shield," she said, "truth needs a woman brave enough to break it." The quote detonated online within seconds. Hashtags erupted, screens lit up, and the chamber filled again with the hum of history being rewritten in real time. But inside the room, no one moved, because every person present, including Kash Patel, knew something irreversible had just begun. The red live light flickered once, then vanished. The broadcast froze mid-frame. Jasmine's eyes still locked on Patel's, her lips parted as if about to drop one last word. In the control room, chaos erupted. "Cut the feed! Cut it now!" a producer screamed, spilling coffee over the console. "Kill it the moment she says CIA connection. I don't care if it blacks out." Technicians scrambled, hands trembling over switches, but the silence that followed was worse than anything she could have said. Millions of televisions across America blinked into static, in bars, in hospital lounges, in military bases. Screens went dark at the same second, like someone had pulled the plug on the nation itself. Confusion erupted, curses filled the air, and yet, in that blackout, everyone understood one thing. They had just seen too much. Inside the chamber, the sound returned in echoes, the faint buzz of dying microphones, the soft rustle of papers being shuffled to feign order. Patel leaned toward his aide, his voice a hushed hiss caught by a live mic that refused to die. "She doesn't know everything," he muttered, glancing toward Jasmine with a flash of something between fear and fury. "Not yet." The words traveled through the speakers in the control room before the engineers could mute them, spilling like gasoline onto the fire of public suspicion. Jasmine stepped out into the corridor, the world outside strangely quiet, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Her phone buzzed once. No caller ID. A gloved hand brushed past, leaving behind a folded envelope. The paper was damp, ink slightly smeared, but the label was clear. 3-2, the original copy. She opened it under the flickering fluorescent light, her eyes scanning the first few lines. Victim statements, unredacted names, timestamps that contradicted official reports. The breath left her chest in a slow, deliberate exhale. Her pulse thudded in her ears like distant drums, a rhythm older than fear, the sound of defiance gathering itself. Somewhere behind her, footsteps approached. Jasmine folded the document, slid it into her coat, and turned toward the darkened hall. The cameras were off, the lights were gone, but something far brighter had just been lit. She knew in that silent corridor what the others didn't yet see. This wasn't a hearing anymore. It was a declaration of war. It was past midnight when Jasmine's phone vibrated, a single buzz that sliced through the silence of her apartment. On the screen, an encrypted message blinked like a heartbeat. "I have the original. My name is Maria." The name froze her. Maria Velasquez, a former data engineer at the Bureau, fired 3 years ago after exposing her supervisor for tampering with evidence. No one had heard from her since, until now. Outside, Washington slept under its cold lights, but inside the Justice Building, Kash Patel was already awake. A call from his deputy had torn through the quiet. "Director, there's movement in the archives. Unregistered login attempt from a ghost account." Patel's voice was a low snarl through clenched teeth. "Find the leak before she does. I don't care who you have to wake up." Within minutes, black SUVs roared out of the garage like hounds unleashed into the night. Jasmine sat at her kitchen table, phone still glowing in her palm, the city's sirens echoing faintly through the window. Her mind flashed back to the hallway, to the envelope marked 302, the original copy. Someone out there had risked their life to get her that file, and now someone else was reaching out from the dark. She whispered to herself, "If I stay silent, they'll erase the record. If I speak, they'll erase me." Her reflection in the glass looked almost unfamiliar. The same woman who once believed the system could fix itself. That illusion was gone. She opened her laptop, the blue light painting her face in cold defiance, and typed, "Where can we meet?" Across town, Maria's eyes flicked over the reply. She sat alone in a motel room lit only by the glow of a TV playing static, a gun on the nightstand, and a hard drive duct taped beneath the table. Her fingers trembled as she typed back, "Some truths don't survive daylight. Come alone." Jasmine closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath. Outside, the night was heavy and watchful, as if the city itself knew what was coming. She slipped the folder into her coat pocket, looked once toward the Capitol dome shimmering in the distance, and whispered, "Then let them come." She chose to speak. Rain fell like needles through the yellow haze of flickering streetlights, painting the asphalt in streaks of golden shadow. The parking lot was nearly empty, just two silhouettes facing each other under the trembling glow of a dying lamp. Thunder rumbled somewhere over the Potomac, low and restless, as if the sky itself was eavesdropping. Jasmine stepped out from her car, coat pulled tight, hair damp from the mist. Her heels splashed softly against the puddles. The sound sharp, precise, deliberate. Across from her, Maria emerged from the darkness, hood up, hands shaking. She looked thinner than Jasmine remembered from the photos. Eyes red, sleepless, haunted. In her fist, a small USB glimmered under the rain like a blade. Maria's voice trembled when she spoke. "Inside this is a list of 23 names," she said, each syllable cracking like glass. "And one organization. They made a deal. Total immunity." She looked down, almost ashamed of the words leaving her mouth. "My sister. She was one of the girls. She never came home from that island." The rain fell harder, masking the silence between them. Jasmine felt her throat tighten, not from shock, but from fury so deep it almost burned. She stepped closer, taking Maria's cold hand in both of hers. "They thought those files would stay buried," she said softly. "They thought fear would keep us quiet." Maria's eyes glistened. "It kept me quiet for years." Jasmine shook her head slowly. "Not anymore." Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of something irreversible. She closed Maria's fingers around the USB for a heartbeat before taking it, as if sealing a pact between survivors. "We're going to say their names," she whispered, her eyes fierce beneath the rain. "And this time, the whole damn country will listen." From the distance, headlights swept across the lot, black SUVs crawling like predators searching for movement. Maria flinched. Jasmine didn't. She slipped the USB into her pocket and met Maria's terrified gaze with quiet certainty. "Go," Jasmine said. "If they find you, they'll bury you too. Leave the rest to me." Lightning split the sky above them, illuminating her face for a single second. Defiant, fearless, unbreakable. And as the storm swallowed the sound of tires and sirens, one truth cut through the rain. Some wars don't start with bullets. They start with women who refuse to stay silent. By sunrise, America was no longer silent. The first spark came from a single tweet, a short clip of Jasmine standing beneath the rain, eyes lit with defiance, saying only 4 words. "We will say their names." Within hours, the clip exploded across the internet. By noon, Unseal the Truth had swept the globe, lighting up timelines from New York to Nairobi, from Tokyo to Toronto. News anchors struggled to keep up. Every outlet wanted the same headline: "The woman who opened the files." Inside FBI headquarters, panic spread faster than the hashtag. Kash Patel stormed into the operations room, his voice slicing through the din of ringing phones. "Lock it down," he barked. "No agent, no analyst, no one talks to the press. Not a word leaves this building." His aides exchanged nervous glances, aware the command came too late. Outside those walls, the dam had already burst. Screens across America filled with Jasmine's face. Independent news channels replayed her words from the leaked clip, her tone calm but lethal. If justice must die to protect their reputations, then America has already lost its soul. The line hit like a thunderclap. On talk shows, veterans quoted it. Teachers wrote it on whiteboards. Even late-night hosts dropped their usual jokes, replaying her voice against images of empty courtrooms and sealed folders. Patel slammed his fist against the desk so hard the coffee mug shattered. "Shut her down," he shouted. "Take down the feed. Discredit her. Flood the channels with noise. Anything." But the tech chief hesitated, staring at his monitor as notifications streamed endlessly. "Sir, it's everywhere," he said softly. "Every mirror site, every private server. You can't delete it anymore." In diners, strangers argued about truth and loyalty. In military bases, soldiers watched in silence, their faces unreadable. On the steps of the Capitol, college students held candles and homemade signs that read, "Justice doesn't need permission." The nation that once scrolled past scandals now stood still, watching one woman refuse to bend. Patel pressed both hands to his temples, whispering through clenched teeth, "She doesn't know what she started." But even as he said it, the answer was already in the streets, in the chants, in the screens, in the eyes of millions who had woken up overnight. Because he could censor television, he could silence his agents. But no man, not even Kash Patel, could extinguish a fire that now burned inside millions of hearts. The studio lights dimmed to a softer glow, casting halos over the stage where 4 chairs stood in a perfect line. The banner above them read "The Women Who Weren't Heard." It wasn't a political show. It wasn't a debate. It was confession. Raw, unedited, dangerous. Jasmine Crockett sat in the center, not as a congresswoman, but as a witness, flanked by 3 women whose names the world had forgotten, but whose pain refused to die. The cameras rolled in silence. Karen was the first to speak. Her hands trembled as she held a faded photograph. A girl of 16 smiling in a school uniform, eyes bright, unaware of the nightmare waiting on a private jet. "That's me," she whispered, voice quivering. "That was the day before I disappeared for 6 months." The studio audience inhaled sharply, and somewhere behind the glass, a producer pressed his hand to his mouth to hide the tremor in his breathing. Another survivor, Lena, spoke next. She didn't cry. Her tone was ice cold, steady. "I was told to forget. They told me it would ruin important people." She paused, looking straight into the camera. "They didn't say it would ruin me first." The control room fell silent. No cue cards, no script. Just a woman reclaiming the words stolen from her. Jasmine reached across the table, resting her hand gently on Karen's shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," she said softly. "You were never supposed to be alone." Her voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the weight of collective truth pressing on her chest. The camera zoomed in on her face, tears glistening but unfallen. "For every girl whose story was buried under a man's title, we hear you now." The room held its breath, and even the technicians stopped moving. Across America, televisions glowed in living rooms, hospital wards, and diners. No one spoke. It was the kind of silence that didn't come from disinterest, but from shame. A silence heavy with recognition, like a nation realizing too late that its daughters had been crying for years. When the segment ended, there was no applause, no outro music, no pundit commentary, just the sound of quiet, the sound of guilt, grief, and a country finally listening. Within 24 hours of the broadcast, the counterattack began. Kash Patel's war room came alive before dawn. screens flickering with social media dashboards, paid analysts on headsets, PR executives typing like machine guns. Discredit her, drown her out, flip the story before breakfast, he ordered. A senior advisor smirked. The more she talks, the more we make America doubt her. By noon, doctored videos flooded the internet. Jasmine's face spliced beside riots, her speeches twisted into sound bites calling for FBI collapse. Anchors on Patel-friendly networks repeated the same line. Is Representative Crockett endangering national security? Commentators smiled into cameras as if they were reporting the weather, not orchestrating character assassination. In one segment, Patel himself appeared, polished, calm, eyes cold. We're dealing with misinformation, he said smoothly, and sometimes the source of chaos wears a smile. But something unexpected happened. Viewers had seen the real Jasmine the night before, her trembling hand on Karen's shoulder, her tears unhidden beneath the lights. The contrast was too sharp, the smear too calculated. Within hours, millions began to push back. The hashtag I Stand With Jasmine surged to #1, carried by veterans, teachers, nurses, people who rarely posted politics but felt the sting of the lie. One retired soldier tweeted, "They called her a traitor for demanding justice? Then call me one too." Underneath, a mother from Texas wrote, "If she's the problem, maybe the problem was never her." The algorithm Patel's team built to bury her name became the same machine spreading her words. That evening, Jasmine stood on the Capitol steps before a wall of microphones. The air was sharp, the crowd restless. She didn't read from notes. Her voice was steady, cutting through the noise with surgical calm. "I am not against America," she said, her gaze sweeping the lenses aimed at her. "I am fighting for America to live up to its own Constitution." For 3 seconds, there was silence. Then a roar, a wave of applause that drowned the city traffic. Across thousands of screens, her words replayed again and again, a single line turned anthem. Patel watched from his office, jaw clenched, the glow of the hashtag reflecting off his glasses. He whispered to himself, almost in disbelief. She turned the smear into fire. The chamber was packed tighter than ever before. Rows of reporters, cameras, and restless officials crowding every inch of marble floor. The red live lights blinked back to life, brighter, hungrier, as if the entire nation had gathered once more to watch history hold its breath. Jasmine Crockett walked in slowly, the click of her heels echoing through the hall like countdowns before an explosion. Kash Patel was already seated, his tie knotted too tight, his jaw stiff, hands folded in that same practiced calm that had fooled Washington for years. The chair recognized her to speak. Jasmine didn't glance at her notes. Instead, she tapped the microphone once, and the giant LED screen behind her flickered to life. A grainy security feed filled the screen. Time-stamped, dated, marked FBI HQ, confidential. Gas rippled through the room before the audio even began. The footage showed Patel in his office, late at night, signing a red-bordered document. His voice, caught clearly by the camera mic, was unmistakable. "Redact the names, all 7. We'll call it national security." The room detonated. Photographers rose as one, camera shutters clattering like machine fire, every flash slicing through the tension. Patel's face drained of color. He stared at the footage as though it were a ghost clawing back from the grave. His aide shifted beside him, whispering frantically, "We can explain this." But Patel didn't move. His pupils darted, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Jasmine waited, letting the noise burn itself out. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, too steady for comfort. "7 names," she said. 7 lives you protected, not because they were innocent, but because they were powerful. She turned her gaze directly on Patel, her words slicing the silence with surgical precision. "Justice," she said, pausing between each word, "cannot be edited." The quote hit the microphones like thunder. In the press gallery, a journalist whispered, "That's the line." Within minutes, the clip spread like wildfire, headlines flashing across every network. Jasmine Crockett exposes redaction order live. Patel's hand twitched toward his glass of water, but it slipped, spilling across the table like blood under light. He didn't bother wiping it. He knew the cameras had already captured what mattered. Not the water, but the fall of a man who thought he could erase the truth. And as the chamber erupted, reporters shouting, phones buzzing, the gavel hammering in vain, Jasmine simply stood there, unflinching amid the chaos. Her eyes were calm, certain. One woman, one sentence, and the foundations of Washington had begun to shake. The room had no windows, no name, and no record of its existence. Its walls were painted in the soundproof black, the kind of silence that devours secrets whole. A single bulb hung over the table, casting the four men beneath it in half shadow, figures of authority reduced to silhouettes of fear. The air smelled faintly of coffee, sweat, and the static of power being misused. Kash Patel sat stiffly, his tie loosened, knuckles white against the tabletop. Across from him sat three men, older, smoother, more dangerous. Their suits carried no insignia, their badges no names. One of them spoke first, his tone calm and surgical. Epstein was a strategic asset, he said, the words cold enough to frost glass. She's not allowed to touch that. You understand what's at stake. Patel's eyes twitched. He had spent his career playing the part of the unshakable man. But this was different. The footage Jasmine had released had burned through the city like wildfire. Donors were panicking, senators whispering, allies retreating. He clenched his jaw until it ached. I tried, he hissed. I've silenced journalists, frozen agents, buried the files deeper than anyone could dig. But she's got the public now. She's untouchable. The second man leaned forward, his face half hidden by the halo of smoke curling from his cigarette. Then use the public, he said simply. Turn them. Feed them their own fear. His voice was neither suggestion nor request. It was an order disguised as advice. If she becomes a symbol, destroy the symbol. Make her look unstable, dangerous. If truth doesn't scare them, make her the threat. Patel's fingers drummed once, twice. You want a character assassination? He said quietly. You already started one, the third man interrupted, his voice gravel and menace. Now finish it. He slid a small envelope across the table. Inside, Patel saw a list. Influencers, lobbyists, digital operatives. The machinery of reputation warfare. She wants war, the man said, standing up, his shadow stretching across the table. Give her one. As the door shut, the room fell into darkness again. Patel stared at the list. His reflection caught faintly in the polished surface. A man watching the last pieces of his morality crumble. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, and for the first time, he realized he might win the battle but lose his soul. The lights flickered once, as if even the power grid hesitated to keep this secret alive. The message arrived just before dawn. An anonymous envelope slipped under Jasmine's office door, the paper still damp with rain. Inside was a single flash drive and a note written in hurried block letters. Tonight's meeting. Listen. No name, no return address, just the faint scent of cigarette smoke clinging to the paper. She locked her door, plugged the drive into her laptop, and pressed play. A hiss of static filled the room, then voices. 4 men, low and deliberate, and then came the one that froze her blood. Kash Patel. The recording was clean, unmistakable. His voice carried that same clipped arrogance the public had grown to recognize. If we have to sacrifice a few to protect the system, he said, then let it happen. We serve the order, not the noise. Jasmine leaned closer to the screen, her heart hammering. In the background of the tape, she could hear faint footsteps, the clink of a lighter, the cold detachment of men who had made peace with corruption. It wasn't just a smoking gun. It was an execution order for truth itself. By midday, she was standing at a podium, the press packed shoulder to shoulder, cameras humming like wasps. The air inside the briefing room vibrated with tension. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, voice steady, you are about to hear what accountability sounds like when power thinks no one is listening. She pressed play. Patel's words filled every speaker, every phone, every feed. The silence that followed was deafening. Within minutes, the clip went viral. Networks looped it, newspapers printed it, millions replayed the line. Sacrifice a few to save the system. Hashtags surged. Crowds formed outside the FBI headquarters. Patel appeared on television that evening, his composure cracking under the weight of his own voice. "It's fabricated," he stammered. "Deep fake, manipulated." But experts confirmed the audio, frame by frame, tone by tone. And when the anchor played the video of Patel speaking those very same words, every twitch of his jaw, every blink synced perfectly with the sound. There was nothing left to deny. For the first time, the man who had edited truth found himself trapped inside his own unedited confession. The Fox News studio glowed sterile and bright, cameras circling like vultures over a battlefield disguised as an interview set. Kash Patel sat under the glare of the lights, every bead of sweat magnified on the high-definition screens. His tie was too tight, his smile too rehearsed. But his hands, they betrayed him, trembling just slightly on the table. The network billed it as an exclusive clarification, but everyone watching knew what it really was: a public execution dressed as journalism. The host leaned forward, eyes sharp, tone deceptively casual. "Director Patel," he began, "there's been a lot of talk about interference. That someone high up told you to bury the Epstein investigation for national security reasons. I'll ask you simply, were you ever instructed to let it go?" The air in the studio thickened. Even the teleprompter paused, the words frozen mid-scroll. Patel inhaled, lips parting on instinct before his mind caught up. "Yes," he said softly. "I was told to leave it alone." The sentence dropped like a bomb. 5 seconds of silence followed. 5 eternal seconds where the host blinked, the producers stared, and America leaned closer to their screens. In those 5 seconds, the red light above the camera burned brighter than ever, capturing not a denial, not an excuse, but a confession. Somewhere in the control room, a technician mouthed, "Oh my God," before realizing his mic was live. Patel blinked, too late to pull it back. "I mean, contextually, national protocols," he stammered, words tumbling uselessly as the host raised a single eyebrow. "Director," he said evenly, "you just confirmed what millions have suspected for years." The clip was clipped, trimmed, uploaded, and by the time Patel left the studio, it had already passed 50 million views. By midnight, it hit 100. Every headline screamed the same phrase: "He said it." Crowds flooded the streets outside the Capitol, chanting Jasmine Crockett's name, waving signs that read, "Leave nothing alone." In one careless sentence, Kash Patel had undone a decade of silence. His empire of secrecy cracked in real time, the echoes of his words rebounding across the nation like gunfire. And just like that, one confession brought the walls of power crashing down. Dawn broke over a different America. The cities that once buzzed with noise were now wrapped in silence and candlelight. Across 50 states, people gathered in parks, churchyards, and courthouse steps, their hands cupping flickering flames, their breath rising in cold morning air. It wasn't protest anymore. It was remembrance. From New York's Union Square to the shadow of the Golden Gate, thousands held signs glowing beneath the candles. "Truth lives here." The words shimmered like a quiet oath, reflected in tearful eyes and trembling hands. Old veterans stood beside young activists, priests beside atheists, teachers beside truck drivers. A patchwork nation bound by one thing: the refusal to forget. The sound of 1,000 candles lighting at once became the soft heartbeat of a country waking up. And at the center of it all, under the white dome of the Capitol, stood Jasmine Crockett. The marble steps were her stage, but her voice belonged to everyone listening. She didn't read from paper. She didn't need to. Every word came from the place where grief meets resolve. "I am not against my government," she began, her voice echoing through the cold air, strong and clear. "I am against the lies spoken in its name." The crowd stirred, not with applause, but with something heavier, deeper. Veterans straightened their backs. Mothers pressed their children closer. Cameras zoomed in on Jasmine's face, not a politician's mask, but a soldier's calm after battle. "Justice isn't a headline," she continued. "It's a promise we owe to those who can't speak anymore." For a moment, no one moved. Even the wind seemed to pause to listen. Then a ripple started. One candle lifted high, then another, and another, until the entire square became a sea of light. Tears glimmered in the flames, but they weren't tears of fear anymore. They were pride, fierce and unashamed. the kind that comes when a nation finally finds its reflection and doesn't look away. As Jasmine lowered her microphone, she looked out over the ocean of light and whispered almost to herself, "They tried to bury truth, but they forgot it was a seed." The night before the vote, the Capitol was cloaked in mist, the air heavy with anticipation. Inside a dim side corridor, footsteps echoed, hurried, cautious. When Jasmine turned, she saw her, Maria, pale, exhausted, but alive. In her trembling hands was a weathered briefcase sealed with red tape. "I found it," she whispered, voice barely audible. "The 302 Master Index." Jasmine's eyes widened. The file wasn't supposed to exist. The myth every journalist, every agent had chased for years. Maria placed it on the table, her fingers still shaking. "It's all here," she said. "Every name, every transaction, every flight manifest. 5 agencies and 1 foreign government stamp. They all knew." The words landed like stones in still water, sending invisible ripples through the room. Under the cold fluorescent lights, Jasmine unsealed the case. Inside were hundreds of pages, marked, redacted, stamped, re-stamped, a palimpsest of crimes and cover-ups stretching decades. Her eyes caught one phrase repeated again and again in bureaucratic ink: national interest. She read it aloud, almost laughing at the hypocrisy. National interest? Whose nation? Whose interest? Her voice cracked, but not from fear, from fury sharpened by truth. When the hearing reconvened the next morning, the air outside buzzed with tension. Journalists pressed against the barricades. Protesters filled the steps like a living tide. Jasmine entered the chamber, holding the index high for all to see. Cameras zoomed in as the red seal glimmered under the light. She placed it on the witness table and opened to the final page. "No one," she said, her voice cutting through the noise, "not even the government, stands above the law." The room erupted. Gasps, then applause, then a wave of clapping that rolled through the gallery like thunder. Outside, the crowd caught the line through live broadcast, chanting it back like an anthem. The sound grew, swelling, unstoppable. Truth echoing off the marble pillars of the Capitol and into the streets below. Maria stood at the edge of the crowd, tears blurring her vision. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt human again, and free. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels sacred, the kind that only comes when a nation has wept itself dry. Thousands gathered before the Capitol, their candles trembling in the soft wind, reflections dancing across the white stone like stars scattered at their feet. Jasmine Crockett stood at the center of the steps, her face illuminated not by camera lights, but by the glow of ordinary people holding the truth in their hands. The storm had passed, but its echo remained in every heartbeat around her. She looked out over the sea of light. Men, women, children, survivors, all of them carrying a small flame for someone who never came home. Her voice, when it came, was soft but sure, wrapping around the crowd like a benediction. "For all those who were forced into silence," she said, her eyes glistening, "tonight, your voices have become the heart of America." The words hung in the air, trembling, then finding rhythm as the crowd whispered them back in unison. 1,000 voices merging into one. The camera panned slowly across the steps. Maria clutching a single candle, veterans saluting with tears streaming down their faces, mothers holding photos against their chests. The air shimmered with emotion, pride, grief, and the fragile relief of justice finally spoken aloud. Jasmine lowered her gaze, the flame in her hand reflecting in her eyes like a promise she refused to break. She whispered one last line, barely audible but destined to echo far beyond the Capitol. "Justice isn't loud. It's patient. It waits until someone dares to open the door." The screen faded to black, and then, in stark white letters, a single sentence appeared. "Truth burns slower than lies, but it never dies." A heartbeat of silence. Then the music rose, low, solemn, like the breath of a new dawn. And finally the question appeared. Not for Jasmine, but for every soul watching, every person holding a candle, every American who had turned away before. If truth costs you your peace, will you still speak it? The truth in this story reminds us that justice is not born from power, but from the courage to speak what's right, even when the world chooses silence. Remember, silence may protect you for a moment, but only truth can set you free forever. If one day the truth costs you your peace, will you still stand for it? Truth burns slower than lie, but it never dies. If this story touched your heart, don't just let it fade into silence. Hit subscribe, like, and share so more people can feel the power of truth. Every voice matters, and yours might be the one that keeps the flame alive. This story was created for reflection and inspiration. It does not represent any individual or organization. Viewer interpretation and discussion are encouraged, but every audience member holds their own responsibility for what they take away. Now it's your turn. When justice stands on trial, what would you choose to protect first? Your comfort or the truth? I'll be waiting to read your answer.